And then the hardest part is when someone says, "What do you do?" And all of a sudden my BlackBerry stopped. When you step away from that kind of strength of identity, you go through a bit of a withdrawal. You begin to question your value now. I'm not important anymore. I'm not needed anymore. It's a really hard transition for most people to make.
Let's zoom through. Welcome to The Experience Exchange, the podcast for people who've spent decades building careers and are now asking, what's next? I'm Pippa Woodhead. In this series, we're having honest conversations about second acts, what it takes to reinvent yourself, how to rebuild credibility without the title, and why your experience still matters even when everything feels different. Let's get started. Today, I'm joined by James W. Keyes, who held not one but two CEO roles at major global brands, 7-Eleven and Blockbuster. James stepped away from the C-suite a few years ago to focus on education advocacy, writing, and some unexpected collaborations, including working with YouTuber Mr. Beast. This conversation is about James's experience after the corner office, how he suggests you figure out what you actually want from your second act versus what people expect, and why continuous learning matters more than ever. So, I want to ask you about your transition from corporate life. So you had two very high-profile CEO roles, right? So it would have been natural that a lot of your identity was tied up in these roles. Did you find that when you stepped away? How did you experience that?
A lot of my identity, you mean all of my identity?
Okay.
No, this is what happens. This is what happens. I was 20 years at 7-Eleven.
Yeah.
I was 7-Eleven. Friends knew me as CEO of 7-Eleven. The public knew me as the CEO of 7-Eleven. When you step away from that kind of strength of identity, you go through a bit of a withdrawal. And I remember two distinct things. One was my BlackBerry at the time. You remember we carried BlackBerries, and all of a sudden my BlackBerry stopped. And I had gone from this massive flow of information and messages and calls to virtually nothing. 2 weeks after I had left, it just dried up, and you begin to question your value now. I'm not important anymore. I'm not needed anymore. And then the hardest part is when someone says, "What do you do?" You don't know what to answer. And you pause for a second when that happens, and you don't want to say, "Well, nothing," but that's the reality. You're in between. You do nothing. And so, yeah, it's a really hard transition for most people to make. It doesn't matter if you've been there 20 years or 20 weeks. Your role, your career becomes your identity. But you can overcome it. You can overcome it. That's the good news.
So how long was it from leaving 7-Eleven till you took this very other big CEO role at Blockbuster?
It was almost 2 years, but here's what happened during that interim. I came to the conclusion that the job is not me. And that was a very important conclusion to come to when I took on something as challenging as Blockbuster, because otherwise my identity would have been wrapped up in Blockbuster, and I could have suffered very badly from damage to that identity because of what was inevitable at Blockbuster, the collapse of the financial markets and the need for a restructuring. But during that interim period of time, I discovered that I rediscovered myself, that my identity wasn't 7-Eleven. My identity was a successful business person. And it was also all the other things I did. I'm a pilot. So people say, what do you do? And I'd say, I'm a pilot, something I'm very proud of doing.
Yeah.
Or I'd say I'm an artist.
Oh,
And
really?
today I've actually been able to say I'm an author.
Yeah. You can
We
say
can
now
be
I'm a
whatever we want to
polymath.
be. I'm a polymath. Yeah.
When you left 7-Eleven, were you looking for another role, or did you think, right, I'm going to do something completely different? Did you want to go back to corporate?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Now, I didn't want another role. What I wanted is another opportunity. I
Mm.
learned a lot at 7-Eleven. I learned the power of technology to transform companies, and I set out to find another company that needed to be transformed. I was actually looking at 2. There were 2 very big names in America that were struggling at the time. One was Radio Shack and one was Blockbuster. So
Mm.
Radio Shack and Blockbuster. And, private equity was, being very, very aggressive and encouraging me to go buy something with them because I had had a very good run. We had a 10x increase in the value of, equity at 7-Eleven, and that's a sweet spot for private equity, so they were saying, "Let's go buy something else and turn it around." And, as I said, I was looking at both Radio Shack and Blockbuster, ended up in, Carl Icahn's office, one of the largest shareholders of Blockbuster, and he convinced me to join the company rather than take it private. Now, in hindsight, that was a huge mistake in hindsight.
Mm.
In hindsight's always 2020. But had I known that the financial markets were about to collapse 18 months later, I would have proceeded in staying the course, take it private, refinance all the debt, and
Mm.
Blockbuster would still be around today, I'm convinced.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've spoken about this in a separate interview, and you've talked about this at length in other interviews, that the story that people think they know about Blockbuster isn't quite what you say
Yeah,
happened.
totally, totally false. Yeah.
Yeah,
Perception. It's based on perception.
yeah.
The perception that Blockbuster didn't keep up with technology, not at all true.
It's then after Blockbuster, where were you at?
After Blockbuster, I again started looking at opportunities to buy things. Was able to buy into a brand called Wild Oats. There was a chain of stores in the western part of the United States built by Tesco, the British retailer, called
Mm.
Fresh and Easy. So I partnered with a private equity company, and we bought those. I did a number of sort of smaller, nothing as big as Blockbuster or 7-Eleven, but smaller turnaround opportunities I became engaged with, and of course, sit on a couple of boards and do some other advisory work from time to
Mm.
time as well.
Mm. But some people might be watching this and thinking, God, you did so well, and clearly financially things weren't an issue. Why didn't you just go and play golf, fly a plane, and have a nice time?
Oh my gosh! Well, first of all, I'm not good enough at golf. I do play, but I discovered, we all think, boy, if I just had the time, I would be a great golfer. And once I had the time, I discovered my handicap got worse. I
Oh,
was
really?
actually, yeah, yeah, I was not going to be ever a great golfer. So, and I enjoy golf, but not as a full time occupation. And flying is great. I love to fly, but I also had nowhere to fly if I didn't have a job. And so it became one of those things that stepping back after many years in a corporate role, I realized actually this is what I like to do.
Yeah.
It's no longer a job if you wake up every day and you can't wait to go do it. And
Mm.
that is something that honestly, I find more stimulating than golf or even flying my airplane, is being able to get into a corporate challenge. You see, any company, especially a company in trouble, is like it's like an artistic effort. It's like a lump of clay that you can remold and reshape into something new and something beautiful.
Yeah. Well, nice. I haven't heard many people speak with so much passion about that, but that's interesting to hear you say.
That's the artist in me coming out.
A lot of people in corporate assume that the stage after CEO is, boards, advisory work, maybe some speaking. You've gone on to do some really interesting things. Like, you've written a book, you're doing education advocacy, you've had collaborations like your one with Mr. Beast. Really, really cool stuff you've been
Yeah,
doing. How
yeah.
did you figure out what you actually wanted to do versus what people might have expected you to do?
Yeah, I do a lot. I probably do too many things. I'm spread very, very thin. I do a lot of philanthropic things.
Mm.
I do a lot of creative work, developing big ideas for companies or for society. I'm working on a really cool initiative with education now. But here's what happens, and this is probably counter to what you might think. A lot of people say, well, you must have a plan. You must have sat down and mapped out your life to be able to accomplish the things you've accomplished and to keep doing these amazing things. But no, not at all. It turns out I am actually quite opportunistic in that I believe I have a high level of, let's say, attentiveness to the universe around me. I have my antenna up, if you will. And there are always opportunities that present themselves. Almost every day, there's a new opportunity of some sort. The hard part is to pick the ones you want to focus on. And literally, my attitude is, and this may be part of it, that I was not my job. That was an identity. And for a while, I was trapped in that identity until I realized I can do anything I want to do. Because the more I learn, the more I can do. And it's just a matter of picking those things and being opportunistic when they present themselves to jump on those opportunities and go pursue them, have the courage to do it. I learned at a very early age that I can do anything. I can learn how to learn. So if I want to go be an athlete, I wasn't a very great athlete, but I learned how to play baseball, football, and I was pretty good because I worked really hard at it. And it gave me the confidence to realize if I want to go fly a plane, I have to put in the time, a lot of effort, a lot of training.
Yeah.
But look what I've got today as a result. It's all paid off, and I have the freedom of literally, I'm sitting in my office at an airport in Dallas, Texas. My airplane is downstairs.
Oh, really? That's where you are? This office is at
Yeah,
an airport. Oh my gosh, how amazing.
my office is in a hangar. Yeah. And the aircraft is downstairs. And right now, if you said, meet me in Singapore, maybe not Singapore, but it would be a bit of a long journey.
We could have done
But if
this
you
in
were
person.
we could have done this in person, exactly. But if you were in California, in LA, and you said, meet me for dinner, I could literally get downstairs. There's a 2-hour time difference and a 3-hour flight, and I could be there. Granted, it would be a late dinner. I'd be there probably by 8:30 p.m., but I would be there in time for dinner.
Okay, well, sadly, I'm not in California to meet for dinner, but next time, and you can have an excuse to fly your plane. So one of the things you've done since leaving corporate is write this book, Education is Freedom, which came out a couple of years ago, and you also have an education foundation. And so many people think of education in the more formal sense, like school and university. Can you talk about why learning is so important for people, especially people thinking about this next phase of their career?
Yeah, it is. I'm going to use a flying analogy because when I first got my pilot's license, it takes 40 hours of training, and then they turn you loose. You get your license, and technically you're a pilot. You're not. You're barely able to know how to fly, and basically your pilot's license is a license to learn. Then you embark on truly a lifelong process of continuing to learn because things change all the time. Conditions in the air change all the time. Equipment changes all the time. Laws, rules, regulations of flying change. You have to constantly stay up to speed. So I train once a year for 3 days every year in a simulator with the professional pilots because I have to have the privilege of flying what I fly and the way I fly commercially, in effect. And so the same discipline for learning should be applied to virtually everything we do. It's no different in the boardroom. You can't say, well, I went to school, I got an MBA, therefore I never have to learn anything else. I'm fine. No, your degree in college or graduate school was a license to learn, but to be a successful entrepreneur, business person, human being, frankly, that learning process has to continue really through the rest of your life.
Mm. Yeah, I love that as a philosophy. And so in your book, you quote this guy called Alvin Toffler, who's a futurist and businessman. I had to Google who he was, but very impressive guy. The quote is, "The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn." I really like that.
Exactly.
So for
Exactly.
somebody who's spent, say, 30 years becoming an expert in something, how can they think about this? How can they learn to unlearn? And what did you have to unlearn as well?
Well, here's the reality. The reality is that change is something that's inevitable. And so no matter what we've learned, something is likely to have changed and require us to modify that learning. It's like the scientific process. You can have an experiment and you think you have the right answer, and then if conditions change, if the ingredients change, you have to start over with a new hypothesis and discover what's going to happen. The same thing with learning, whether it's a corporate experience or just you could learn another language, there's always more to learn. And so that process of learning really has to continue. Now, I'm glad you mentioned the Toffler quote because it's even more relevant today. You see, our access to information today is exploding
Mm.
because of the access to technology. And you think about AI, the winners of AI are not going to be the developers, people who program AI. It's going to be those of us who learn to prompt,
Mm.
because the key to artificial intelligence will not be the machine spitting out answers. The way we prompt the machine, the questions we ask, the curiosity we raise will be what elevates the information and the accuracy of that information. So, what it will do is something I think that humans should have done all along, and sometimes we just get lazy. It will hopefully stimulate our natural human curiosity because, frankly, that's how we learn.
Mm.
It's when we're curious, when we ask questions, when we want to know and push the envelope on what's new. What is it that I don't know that I can learn? That, I think, is with the power of technology, going to elevate human learning to a level we've never seen in the history of mankind.
Interesting. I mean, and speaking of AI, one of the themes running through this series is this idea of where does experience still matter? And some, very accomplished people I've spoken to are feeling a bit insecure about their experience because so much of it is, I've gained all of this knowledge over my career and now my knowledge can just be, found with an AI. Like, so what are your thoughts on when genuine experience and time is still really valuable?
Yeah, I think experience will always be valuable, but this is where I think that idea of continued learning is so important because there's a tendency for people to encourage young people, especially, to go deep on any given subject. You should be a specialist. We have parents saying to their kids when they're 10 years old, you need to go be an engineer, or you should be this, or you should be that, and trying to steer the children into one specific vertical. But if you think about the unknown element of technology and artificial intelligence, especially, none of us can sit here today and say which jobs may go away. No one could have predicted 20 years ago that a taxi driver job may be in jeopardy because you may pick up your phone and call a stranger to come pick you up in his car. I mean,
Yeah.
you would have said, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard, right?
Mm.
No
Mm.
one would ever do that. Here we are with Uber. Yet the opportunity that was created by the internet wasn't just Uber, it was a broad range of things. Who could take advantage of those opportunities? Those who were best able to pivot and shift from one deep area of knowledge to another. So what I'm recommending to people is breadth of knowledge in the information age, in the age of artificial intelligence, will be far more important than depth of knowledge because the machine will go very, very deep.
Mm.
But those very human abilities to go broad and learn what is sometimes being disparaged today, the liberal arts, the ability to understand other humans, to cooperate, to collaborate, the ability to have compassion for each other, critical thinking skills, all of these elements of humanity, I think, will be far more important in the information age than ever before.
Yeah, another thing that's come up in this series a few times is ageism. and people feeling quite insecure about this. I mean, have you experienced this? What are your thoughts?
What's that?
Good.
I'm still 25 in my mind anyway. No, I think age is, I personally just believe age is just a number. I think it doesn't matter. I think attitude is everything. I know some crusty, grumpy 30-year-olds that act like they're 90. And I know some 90-year-olds who act like they're 30 and they're just still hungry and passionate for new adventure every single day. So I think this idea of ageism, um, I think it's something that's probably always been around. Every generation looks at the last generation and says, "What's the matter with them? They're a mess." And then every new generation looks at former generations and, you know, somebody might call me a boomer. I get that on the internet every once in a while. I'll be out there, I'll say something on the internet, and somebody says, "What do you know, boomer?" You know?
Really? People say that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. The internet's harsh. But I laugh at it because it really is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. It's all about your attitude and your ability to wake up every day and recognize that I don't care how old I am. Every day is a new adventure and I can take on something new.
Yeah. I mean, it's great if that's your mindset, but I guess the issue is when it's a bias that people come up against. Like they're heading into a second act, they're wanting to do all these things, people have got lots of ideas, and they're coming across barriers because people are kind of saying, "What do you know, boomer?"
Yeah. So here's the way I look at that. People want to put you in a box, right? That's what you're saying.
Mm.
There's no box. There absolutely is no box. The box is in your head. If you let someone determine your identity, that's bad on you, not them. Because people will always try to put you in a box. People will always try to tell you who you are, what you can do, who you can be. And the reality is, you don't need to pay any attention to that. You're an individual with your own brand, your own identity. Why let somebody else tell you who you are? I think that is, to a large extent, if I had anything that helped to drive me throughout my life, I've spent my whole life with people trying to put me in a box. From the time I was a kid, they said, "You're poor, you can't go to school, you'll never afford it," or "You're this," or "You're that." And when you start a job, people will say, "You're a financial guy, you're not an operator." Okay, so raise my hand and take an operating job. Then all of a sudden they say, "You're an operator, you can't be a financial person." You know, and this happens. It will happen to you throughout your entire career. But if you block out that noise and recognize that's all that is noise. It's other people imposing their preconceived notions, maybe even their own fears onto you. Block that out. You don't need it. There is no box. Don't let them put you in it.
You've lived through massive industry disruption, both at 7-Eleven and then naturally at Blockbuster. What did these experiences teach you about how to read change and adapt? And how does that apply to people who are reinventing themselves at the latter stage of their career?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I have an acronym that I coined. The first three words I wrote in my book, Education is Freedom. I sat down and said, change equals opportunity. And I stepped back and looked at it and I said, huh, look at that. CEO, no accident.
Mm.
Change equals opportunity. It is the role of the CEO to be able to embrace change. And yet, it's probably the single biggest obstacle for any normal human being to be able to see change as opportunity. Because when change happens, as humans, we revert to our natural instinct to resist, to fear, to question it, to pause, to doubt ourselves, et cetera, et cetera. And yet, all commerce, if you just step back and look at all commerce, begins and ends with change. Something happens, somebody responds to that change, they're compensated for it. And then what happens? Too often, they'll create an entity, and then it doesn't want to change anymore. it becomes afraid of change. And someone else comes in. One of my favorite stories. I grew up as a kid looking at the Sears Roebuck catalog. Do you remember Sears Roebuck?
No.
Big retailer. Sears was a big international retailer.
I think I grew up in
but
the
it
UK. I think
started
maybe it wasn't a thing in the UK.
I think they may have been in the UK for
Oh,
a
really?
while, but it was
Okay.
huge in the United States. Big retailer. They started with a catalog because in the United States there weren't big cities, and so they were the supplier to people moving west. They would, provide tools and equipment and clothing all via catalog by mail. And then they decided they needed stores, so they built stores. They were like Walmart, Walmart. They were like Walmart stores. And then all of a sudden, Walmart put a lot of pressure on them. They started adapting to change in ways that Sears couldn't keep up with. And then Walmart became the biggest retailer in the United States. And then Amazon came in. And what did Amazon do? They went online and started selling product instead of stores online. Well, think about that full circle. Sears Roebuck Company started as a catalog company doing the same thing that Amazon's doing today, sending people things by mail that they would buy online or in a catalog. And yet the changes that occurred all along the way, Sears was not able to keep up with. So part of the reason people don't know Sears today is they didn't keep pace with that change. They didn't adapt. And ultimately Walmart replaced them, and now Amazon's putting pressure on Walmart and may replace Walmart someday. So
Yeah.
change is it's the ability to adapt to change is critically important, not just for companies, for individuals. Because if you want your career to advance, you have to be able to see change as an opportunity, embrace it while everyone else has their head down and is cowering in a corner out of fear. If you embrace that change, this is true, it happens all the time, and run with it, then you too can be successful as an individual.
And it sounds so great, but I mean, of course, people really struggle with change. Do you have any advice for, maybe you've mentored someone who's struggling with change and managed to make them see things differently?
Yeah, my whole book is about dealing with change, because that's why I wrote the 3 words, change equals opportunity, because the antidote, well, the obstacle to change is fear. We are, as humans, just afraid. We have self-doubt, we have fear that we're gonna lose something, someone will take our job, we'll lose an opportunity, we'll fail. Those fears are nonsense. Again, they're fears that are rattling around in our head, but they're not true. And the antidote to fear is knowledge. So the more you know and the more you can learn, the more you can prepare, the less you have to be afraid of. And so there is really zero excuse for fear and zero excuse for not being able to embrace change, because you can learn your way out of any problem and learn your way out of or into virtually any opportunity if you're willing to do it, put the work in.
If you were mentoring someone who is perhaps late 40s, 50s, and they're doing well, but they are thinking, right, Jim, when all this goes away, when my corporate success is gone, I still want to be doing things. I have all these ideas, but I don't know how I should be thinking about them. Like, how can you maybe coach someone through approaching a second act career?
I literally just came from a bar doing this with a friend.
Oh, really?
Literally, yes, an hour ago. I stopped by, a friend had asked me for some advice, and I stopped and had a drink with him, and he was stuck in his career, um, afraid to move, felt like he couldn't really quit and he couldn't really go forward. And his question to me was, should I just quit? And here's the way I responded. And he's right in that demographic that you described, far enough along in his career that he felt like he should have advanced farther and hadn't yet, and yet too far along that if he doesn't leave and become an entrepreneur now, he feels like it may be too late. So he's right at that critical stage. And here's what I said. First of all, he said, well, I think I'm going to quit. And here's what I think I'm going to do. And he had an idea about some beverages, and he was going to try to create this company, et cetera, et cetera. And what I shared with him was, first of all, there's no urgency in this. No one's forcing you to quit your job. And in fact, if you're already going to quit, why don't you push the envelope on trying to do something with more responsibility and more challenging in your current firm? Why don't you raise your hand and say, give me this chance? This is what I'd like to do. And at the same time, you can also work on your own entrepreneurial ideas, because the farther they're developed, at least you've got a paycheck coming in. So the farther those ideas get developed, the easier it's going to be able to then make that decision. I'm going to leave my comfort of my corporate job and go be an entrepreneur. But now you've got a fully baked idea versus just saying, I'm going to quit and then I'm going to spend my time going to develop an idea. That's a very difficult path. So my simple answer to him was, look, you can do both. You can take the risk that you weren't willing to take before in your corporate career, because you're going to quit anyway. What have you got to lose, right? Step up, take some risk. And what he came up with is, he said, I think I'm going to go to my boss and ask if they will let me develop an innovation center within the company. Great, perfect. Why not? He said, the company is stuck. They're not increasing sales. They could use an innovation center. So I said, great, raise your hand, offer to go do that. And if they don't let you, what have you lost? Nothing. If they do let you, that may advance your career. Then at the same time, he said, okay, and then I'm also going to start working on this entrepreneurial idea I have. And if I don't get to push the envelope on my corporate job, then I can still go and pursue that other path. So that was my advice was, do both. There's nothing preventing you from doing both. And people feel like they're stuck in one and they have to make a harsh decision to leave one and go do another. Not necessary.
But what I'm thinking when you're saying that is, the obstacle for people doing that is going to be time. Because friends I've got that are in senior corporate roles, they are slammed every day. And then at the weekends, they're just exhausted.
If they think they're stretched for time as a corporate employee, imagine what they're going to be as an entrepreneur.
Okay.
That's a wake-up call in a way, because seriously, an entrepreneur, that's a 24/7 job. Yeah. It is nights, weekends. There is no time clock. If you really want to be a successful entrepreneur, give it up. Now, in a corporate job, I know I thought of myself as a corporate entrepreneur. I wasn't a 9-to-5 ever. I was probably a 16, 18-hour day guy, but there's still 9 hours left in the day.
When did you sleep?
Not very often.
Oh dear. Okay, so for people who need to sleep.
But it's choice. And I know it sounds hard, but you know what? Being an entrepreneur is hard. Being a success in the corporate world, it's hard. It's all about choice. But it's also about being smart and not doing unnecessary things. So much of what we do every day, how much of your time do you spend on meaningless emails? I'm guilty.
Yeah.
Stupid things I could delegate to an assistant, things that should be relegated to spam, and I'm sitting there spending time on them. So all of us have the opportunity to be more efficient with our time and to spend it on things that are more valuable to us.
Yeah.
Sounds easy, doesn't it?
The amount of time I spend scrolling. If I took that time away.
Guilty. I know. No, don't stop looking at my Instagram posts.
Your Instagram is very good. I saw you on School of Hard Knocks.
Thank you. Yeah, it's my new career. I've reinvented myself as an influencer.
No, you have. You're doing very well. Okay.
I never saw. Trust me, I didn't see that coming.
So that wasn't intentional. The social media element of what you're doing. That wasn't something you thought.
When I wrote the book, my publisher said you need a social media presence. And I was like, to your point, at my age, I'm going to go develop a social. I think I'm outside of the demographic of typical influencers. And I hired a 24-year-old right out of school,
Mm.
and she started asking me to do all these silly things on the internet, and I was like, you know, that's a corporate CEO doesn't do that. And she's like, suck it up, dude. you you wanna have social media presence or not? Here's what you have to do. And I trusted her. And I got out there. I got way out of my comfort zone. I have friends that would say some of the stuff I do on social media are cringy because they're friends and they're
Mm.
like, oh, dude, how can you do stuff like that? But it works. And here's what I've discovered. I've been in 14 countries in the last year, and every country that I go to, I have people come up to me and say, "Hey, I've been watching your post on Instagram or TikTok, and you're really helping me. You're really helping inspire me or change my
Mm.
life or give me good advice. And thank you for that."
That's
And
fantastic.
I got to tell you, that's more valuable than money. Yeah, and the
Yeah.
power of the internet on a global basis to reach people all over the world. In Ghana, at an entrepreneurs festival in Ghana, and I have people from Botswana, from Nigeria, from Egypt coming up and saying, "Thank you so much for being on the School of Hard Knocks and
Mm.
sharing those 3." And they'll read back to me, they'll quote back to me my 3 pieces of advice: embrace change, have confidence, use clarity. They'll repeat them back, and that happens, and it's like it's a really powerful thing to be able to know you're truly appreciated by people trying to make their own path.
Yeah. I think the cringe element melts away when you realize that you're actually delivering a lot of value.
I have to remind people every once in a while. I'll get somebody that DMs or makes a comment on the thing, and he says, "Hey, Boomer, how can why are you doing this? Why aren't you on the golf course?" And I have to, I usually put a little snide remark. I'm not a very good golfer, or this is fun, and it actually is. It's a
Mm.
lot of fun doing that.
Okay, Jim, final question for you. If you could go back and give yourself a piece of advice the last day being a CEO, what would that piece of advice be?
If I could give myself advice on my last day of being a CEO,
Mm-hmm.
I would say that my advice to myself would be that your identity has nothing to do with this company. You were a CEO, you'll never lose that identity. And you have so much more to offer the world and humanity. Let it fly. Don't be wrapped up in your past. Think about going forward. And I think that's the most valuable piece of advice that I could give, not just myself, but to anybody. We've got a tendency as humans to look in the rearview mirror. It's much better looking out the front of the airplane. Enjoy the view. Look where we're heading. How exciting is this to fly at 45,000 feet? And all of us have the opportunity to do that. But we got to stop looking in the rearview mirror. Look out front.
I love that. Okay, Jim, thank you so much.
Thank you. I enjoyed it as always. I hope we
Good.
can do it again soon.
Oh, I hope so too. Thanks for listening to the Experience Exchange. I'm Pippa Woodhead. If you're thinking about or starting a second act career, have a look at the other episodes in this series. They've been designed with you in mind. And if you're in Singapore, come visit the Experience Exchange on Ang Siang Road, where these conversations happen in person. See you next time.